And in those wars, the Napoleonic Wars, I mean, there several million people died in Europe. A lot of people died in France as well. It was quite tough, and it's funny to see today Napoleon is still a very admired figure in France because he got France out of the French Revolution. I think a lot of people recognize that. French Revolution was a huge massacre. I mean, it was extremely violent. Even people like Danton or Robespierre, who were real leaders of the French Revolution, they cut so many heads off. Even they themselves at the end, they got their own heads cut off. I mean, that was the game. The name of the game is how many heads can we cut off? And so it was gone wild. It was gone wild, and there was probably
even Monsieur Guillotine got his head guillotined.
Everybody, man, nobody was safe at that time. It was a scary time for a lot of people, and nobody got out of there easily. So, but there was a necessity to get the French monarchy to change, and things could have been done more progressively or moderately. And France went to this revolution again. And so this is passionate thing that the French have about extreme violence, intense violence at one moment, and it went bad. And we had the uprisings in the West. We had uprisings in different cities in France. Lyon wasn't happy with this revolution. Other big towns as well. And Napoleon came, and he was a soldier. And that army is still seen as a strong institution in France, and he came as a strong man. And I think this is something which is, compared to your question at the beginning about this vacuum in power, Napoleon filled in this vacuum. He was a small guy, but he had a very strong, I would say, dimension, and he impressed. He impressed, and he arrived at a moment where, again, it's quite astonishing today that France was just not smashed to pieces. I mean, there was no more a king. French were infighting, there were upheavals, everybody. I mean, a lot of people the Prussians could have just came in, Austrians could have came in, the English could have, and they didn't. I mean, this is something maybe a lost occasion for them in hindsight. But Napoleon came in and filled this vacuum. And so I'm not the history of all the peoples in the world, but definitely French are attached to strong personalities. And if there's some sort of, I would say, an adhesion at one moment of terrible sorrow, of disarray, and somebody could come and fill that in, and we'll see it later on with Clemenceau during the First World War, with de Gaulle, especially during the Second World War. And if you go back in time, even going back to Charlemagne or Joan of Arc during in the 15th century, again, France would have been totally wiped out by the Burgunds and by the English. And there's this figure of Joan of Arc coming out of the east of France and saying, I'm going to lead the battle. And all of France followed Joan of Arc. So it could be a strong man or a strong woman, as it was with Blanche de Castille, again, the mother of Louis IX. The French people, they quit their feuds when a strong person arises above the pack and says, I know where we're going, and you must follow, and you should follow me. And usually these are not people who impose. This is quite interesting again. These are people who have naturally risen to power. And Napoleon filled in that vacuum, and he was followed because he told the French, listen, we're all French now. And there were bad things done during the revolution, and there were good things. And he was more of a revolutionary, but he assured the Catholics, he assured the monarchists that there would be room for everybody in the empire that he was building. And that worked. And that worked. And within the French army, they had the Catholics, they had the Republicans, they had the monarchists, and even though it was an offset of the Republic, they found their own place in this empire. So and so Napoleon, not only did he fix the situation in France while he was there, so he thought that he had to spread this out to the rest of Europe. So that was a catastrophe. That didn't work, as all empires. He went too far too soon, and he thought that just with the French military might, and he was a military genius, there's no doubt about that. But after a while, if you don't take advantage, if that advantage when you are such a military genius, it has to be used on short midterm. If you make it last too long, after a while, your enemies, they'll figure you out. They'll understand what you're doing. They'll understand how you work. They'll find your weaknesses. And that's why most empires, either they crumble from within, and we'll probably talk about that, because that is one of the possibilities of empires, or they'll crumble because of the outside pressure. They have too many enemies around them, and the enemies, they will just they would just liaise together and find that way to make Napoleon lose, and that's what happened in Waterloo and Napoleon Napoleon would set off to St. Helen where he died. So this is actually quite interesting to see in the French history how they can get galvanized by an ideology and go to war, and actually after that there were still these issues. And getting back to the French Revolution, after Napoleon, it was very difficult. French didn't know should they put the king back, should they go back to the Republic? What was the idea of the Republic? And there has always been, since the French Revolution, very strong opposition between the Republicans, the monarchists, and then to some extent, I mean, and that has been something that we've seen through the First Republic, Second Republic, even through 1871, 1870s, where with the wars between Napoleon III and the Prussians, again, where France lost Alsace and Lorraine, which had been gained by after the Treaty of Westphalia in the 17th century, and this was tough. So the French after that, the Republic installed, and there was some sort of, I think, Napoleon was no longer there, but the spirit of what Napoleon had built to gather the French around the idea of a nation. Because France actually is a small empire. Contrary to the Germanic people, France is an assembly of people from Corsica, Normandy, Brittany, southwest, from Provence, from the north. Each of these people has actually its own language historically. So it's not, we're not one big Germanic tribe, even if we're called the French and the Franks were Germans. This is just the name of the conqueror of the Franks. When they arrived, I mean, century after century, they gathered all these different peoples from different horizons, different cultures, and made France a small empire within Europe. So it's quite interesting to see, because that has an impact then after on the French mentality and the way they don't see themselves maybe as, or they are not, from a historical view, one and unique people. They are a different assembly of different people. And after, I would say, at the beginning of the 20th century, the French started seeing themselves as really French. That idea came more and more. They were before, but they were French from Normandy or from Brittany. And actually, most people would say, I'm a Briton, or I'm a Corse, or I'm a Norman. And we didn't have the communication they would have today. They didn't even have, at the end of the access to all the newspapers and the press. The elite, the educated people had. But the people, what they would say until the end of the 19th century, as it was in most of of Europe, is, okay, what's going on in my village? What's going on in my town? What's going on in my parish? That was the information. And with the evolution of the technology, with information, also schooling, which became more and more developed after the French Revolution. There was public schools before, but they were taken care of by the church. Then public schooling came. Well, there was this sense, and this was important for the Republic, that people were French. You still had that divide between I would say the Republicans, anti-Catholics, and the Catholics, which were more monarchists before the First World War. What I can say, and I think this is interesting in your analysis of the situations in pre-war. If you look at France pre-war, we still have more or less of a divided society. 30 years before, 50 years, a little less, the French were still fighting against the Germans in the 1871 war. France was still divided. And France, at that time, had this perspective of, I would say, the Industrial Revolution had started a century before. And France was a big country. It had colonies. It was a big country. As I said, it assembled all these different people of Europe. In the West, it had a nice looking country on the map, access to the Mediterranean, access to the Atlantic, colonies all over the world. However, it was being beat. It had been beat by the UK, which is the world's, who had the big superpower. Germany was on the rise, was the big competitor at that time. And France, although it was a superpower, was being beat by Germany, by the UK, and by the US. And a lot of people tend to forget that the US at the beginning of the 20th century was practically already the world's biggest superpower. The UK empire still had not crumbled, but the US was about 30% of the world manufacturing, very strong, very big country. It had already waged a lot of wars, made with South America, make sure that was within under its control. And France did not prepare this. And I think this is interesting in our analysis today, is that France did not see this coming. And France was living on its laurels. we used to be a strong kingdom. We were an empire. We are going to always be leaders of the world. And France didn't see that. And actually, before World War I, there was a lot of havoc. There were a lot of demonstrations in the streets. People wanted minimum wage. There were a lot of strikes. France was mainly rural. 60% of the population was agricultural. They were farmers. French people were farmers at that time, and the French politicians, did not prepare France, or maybe not as well as they should have. In hindsight, again, it's always easy to say it 100 years after. The evolution of this, of what in which direction the world was going. It was living on its laurels, and actually, before World War I, France was sure that if there was going to be a war with Germany, it wouldn't last long. It would be very short. That the French military was quite strong. That Germany would not be as strong, and that it would be something that French could manage quite easily. France ended winning World War I after an alliance with the British. At the beginning with the Russian, then the US came in, but after 4 years, where over 1 million French died, this was a catastrophe for France, where lots of these farmers' kids went to the battlefield. They fought, and it was a catastrophe from a moral perspective, from a historical perspective. These were extremely tough times, and it lasted 4 years. 4 years against the Germans. France didn't see that coming. They thought they were tougher. They thought that Germany could not. Again, let's not forget that Germany also is a new nation. Even if the Germanics were in the Holy Roman Empire, and that they fighting with Austrians, but fighting against the Germans as they did during the Empire. In the First World War, France was quite obnoxious and thought that it wouldn't last long. France won, but it was devastated after World War I. The only thing positive for France that was created was that in those trenches, you had the Republicans, you had the monarchists, you had the Catholics, you had the unions. Exactly. And I would say the union around the French flag, which were blue, white, and red, was born in those trenches, where people from all across the country, whether they're from Normandy, from the north, from Alsace, for after Alsace at the end once it was recuperated, but from the west, they fought together in the same trenches, and they came out of there, I would say, defending the French flag and this idea. Maybe they don't all have the idea of what the nation should be, what the republic should be, but they definitely did develop strong bonds.
One nation bond, yeah.
Exactly, and they were French, and they fought for that French flag, and this was a victory of the French over the Germanics, and this is something which actually helped France after that. So they were the victors.